Hello, I'm your host Sara, and this is Insane. Salam everyone, Ramadan Mubarak. I pray that this month has brought you much needed peace and that God accepts your fasting and your prayers. Where to start? Last couple of months have been quite taxing because of what's going on in Gaza. I'm sure everyone has found it quite difficult to comprehend what's going on. It's certainly taken me a moment to fully process the extent of the atrocities and just everything surrounding that in terms of like leadership, where we are as humanity. And there's been a lot of darkness these past couple of months, and it has affected me to the core. And it's been a mad couple of months trying to just process what's been going on and then trying to not let it affect me in a negative way in terms of like it making me sick. So it's been quite difficult. It certainly has been a reality check. I mean, I wasn't naive before. I always knew that there was some hypocrisy and there was a lot of darkness associated with power, and that the aims of power have never been for the betterment of humanity. But I never truly understood it was to this extent. And I'm sure a lot of people understand what I'm saying. And I just want to say that if you are going through a hard time, it's completely normal. It's a very normal reaction to what is happening. I think the hardest bit for me is like hopelessness. Where do you go from here? Once the truth has been uncovered, what do you do and where do you go from here? I went through like a stage of it being, anytime I wanted to do something of any significance, I just thought it was a bit pointless. But it's important to keep hope alive. I think there's a lot of things that I came to terms with, but one of the hardest things I'm sure that can come up, because a lot of questions do come up when one witnesses such a horrific, horrendous event, the hardest of which is those associated with your faith and with God specifically. I understand that this is a touchy subject and not everyone is comfortable with actually vocalizing what it is they're feeling inside with regards to doubt or questions about faith. And Gaza and what we've witnessed there is no doubt a test of faith. There is no doubt about it, because so many questions come up associated with God and faith. But that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to test your faith. And one of the things that have made me steadfast and attached to God, even in these difficult times, is the beautiful expression of faith of the people of Gaza themselves. They are absolutely remarkable. I mean, they take my breath away, honestly. I have no words. The way that they praise God in the middle of destruction and rubble, and they are saying Alhamdulillah and praying in the middle of that destruction. There is nothing left of their homes. Their families have been taken away. Starvation, complete and utter brutality. And they still bow down to God and they still have faith in God. And that alone increases me in my own conviction to God. How beautiful their faith and their example. And you just wait for God's mercy, because you know no one else is going to show them mercy. and that they are truly, truly in the hands of God, because no one else will show them mercy. And you just wait for it. And instead of this mercy, you see enforced starvation. You see their tents flooded from the rain. And then all of this happening during Ramadan. And instead of the bombardment decreasing, it's escalating. And the enemy is there, humiliating them. And they go unchecked. And nothing happens. Now, the question of evil has always been present throughout philosophical discussions. And the question of evil goes something like this. If God exists and He's the most merciful, then why does He not intervene when suffering and injustice is committed, especially against children? This is an age-old question. Everyone has asked this question. Anyone who has experienced suffering, who has witnessed it, has asked themselves this question. And there's something about injustice that hurts the core of you. It hurts the very inside of you. And I think it's because one feels so hopeless, especially when that injustice is carried out by something or an entity that is much powerful than yourself. And usually injustice is carried out by someone or something more powerful than you. And you feel completely and utterly hopeless in the face of this power. It gets you asking questions like, what's the point of being good if evil is given unchecked power to humiliate and destroy you? Why has God given so much power to such immoral people? Why does not God give the same power to good people? And then you have the added complexity of being a believer and asking these questions, and then having to deal with the guilt of asking these questions, because one does feel guilty. These questions, you're asking them anyway, and once you've asked them, it's important that you answer them, otherwise they just stay there inside you, always eating away at your conviction and your faith. And the only way to deal with them properly is to acknowledge that you have them and then try to see answers, satisfactory answers to them. And this is what this podcast is about. As soon as I asked for guidance, I reached Surah Al Imran, and oh my God, it just answered everything. It was as if that surah was meant for these times. I just found scenarios so similar to what we're going through right now. And it really did soothe my heart and comfort me. The first thing that becomes apparent is that since the beginning of time, Muslims have been subjected to tyranny, brutality, and killing. This is not something new. The Quran is full of examples of prophets being abused, assassinated, tortured, spat at, lied to, humiliated, disowned. You name it, they've experienced it. And so too have their followers. And even in our histories, there have been countless atrocities carried out against Muslims. You have the Mongol invasion that lasted about 162 years. It's estimated around 40 to 60 million people were killed during that time. And then you have recent atrocities. You have the genocide in Bosnia, the genocide against the Kurds. There's just countless. And then you have what's going on in Gaza. So this isn't anything new. This has happened since the beginning of time. Unfortunately, tyranny has always been a constant. The only difference now is that you have, for the first time, got to see it live, happening, unfolding before your very eyes in all its horrendous detail. And you've never experienced that before. But the world has remained as it was. The only difference is that you've witnessed it. So it's important to acknowledge that this isn't a new phenomena. This isn't God all of a sudden, behaving differently, or the world behaving differently. This has always happened. This is as old as time. It's not new. Of doubt as to where is God. This too is old. There's a lot of examples in Al Imran that have similar scenarios to show you that these scenarios and these things that you're experiencing due to your witnessing of the atrocities in Gaza, these scenarios are all old. They've happened before. None of it's new. So, for example, there's a verse in the Quran. This verse isn't in Al Imran. And it says, "Or did you suppose that you would go to paradise untouched by that endured by those before you? Affliction and adversity befell them, and they were shaken until the messenger and those who believed with him said, 'When will the victory of Allah come? Is it not that the victory of Allah is near?'" So this is in reference to the Muslims feeling so defeated that they too questioned, where is God? Where is God's victory? And God mentions here that the Prophet and his people had these questions, where they said, "Mata Nasrullah," when is the victory of God coming? And then God answers, "Ala inna Nasrullahi qareeb." Is it not that the victory of Allah is near? So the verse reminds us that it is a human reaction when tyranny and injustice becomes so insufferable that one begins to question where God is. But at the same time, the verse also reminds you that that is part of how you get to paradise, that you're going to be tested like this. God says you should expect that test, because the verse starts with, "Or did you suppose that you would go to paradise untouched by that endured by those before you? Affliction and adversity befell them, and they were shaken." So he's saying, you think you can get to paradise for free? You think paradise is just this hotel spa that you're going to? Doesn't require any sacrifice? Paradise is an immense reward, and you have to earn your place to get in there. That's what God is saying. You earn your place just like everyone else has earned their place. There's a verse in there that emphasizes the point of test as well. Ayah 179 says, "Allah would not leave the believers in the condition you are in until He distinguishes the good from the evil among you. Nor would Allah directly reveal to you the unseen, but He chooses whoever He wills as a messenger. So believe in Allah and His messenger And if you are faithful and mindful of Allah, you will receive a great reward. Here God is explaining that these tests are brought to distinguish the good from the evil among you. And it certainly has done that, hasn't it? People we thought were good, nope. Turned out they're not. And the people that we thought were bad turned out to be actually quite good. And it also shows you what you're made of, how strong your faith is. And I'm sure a lot of you have reassessed yourselves and those around you, because this is what such events are supposed to do: distinguish good from evil. And God says, nor would Allah directly reveal to you the unseen, but He chooses whoever He wills as a messenger. There's also an expectance that God will not reveal everything. Not everything will be made clear to you. God chooses how much clarity you get and how your questions are answered, to what capacity. Because in the ambiguity, in it not being clear, is where the test is. So you've got to be mindful of that God is watching you and watching how you deal with this situation. And because this is a test, it's got to shake you a bit. And in verse 8, there's a beautiful dua that you can do. It says, "Our Lord, do not let our hearts deviate after you have guided us. Grant us your mercy, you are indeed the giver of all bounties. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب." So this is a dua that God has given us. God is saying, when you feel shaken, because you will feel shaken in faith, here's a dua for you. Our Lord, don't turn us away from faith in you after you have guided us, and grant us mercy. The second point I want to emphasize is that got to understand that what is happening and all defeats in your life are a manifestation of God's will. Nothing would have happened without God's permission. And so everything is a manifestation of God's will. Just as God is capable of giving, He's also capable and within His rights to deny. Just as God gives one blessings, He is capable and within His rights to withhold those blessings. God can do all things and He's free to exercise His power as and when He pleases. As a Muslim, as a believer, you accept that that creation is God's domain, and you do not think that you have the right to infringe upon God's domain, right? And there's lots of verses in Al Imran in which God is telling us continuously, just because you believe, you're not guaranteed victory. That's not how it goes. So examples of these are verse 126, and victory comes only from Allah, the Almighty, the All-Wise. Verse 140, if you have suffered injuries, they suffered similarly. We alter these days of victory and defeat among people so that Allah may reveal the true believers. Choose martyrs from among you, and Allah does not like the wrongdoers. So this is, we alternate these days of victory and defeat. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. So this idea that not all victories belong to you and not all defeats belong to you is something that has been emphasized in the Quran time and time again. And also, you know that on a personal level, you're never victorious all the time. You know for a fact that people don't get what they deserve, that life doesn't treat you well just because you're a good person. You know all of this. You know that to be fact. But still, we forget. We forget, and I forget, and I'm just reminding you right now through these verses. And it is hard to stomach that your belief has no bearing on whether or not you're victorious in life, but that's how life is, and that's how God has deemed it to be. And the way you find solace in that is knowing that this is God's decree, and we are here to submit to that decree, and we are tested on that submission to his decree, because it is a difficult thing to accept, and that's why the reward is so great. So what else is expected of us in these situations? I found a lot of verses that alluded to making sure that we do not grieve in such situations. And I know that's I don't mean don't be sad and just ignore what's going on and just be happy, but do not grieve. I think grief here means don't let it affect you in such a way that you become hopeless and then it affects your faith in God. I think that's the grief God is referring to. And before I go into the verses of Al-Imran that emphasize this point, I just want to point out that the reason why we find injustice or the suffering of others so heinous and why it affects us to the core is because it speaks to our fitrah. It speaks to something that God has placed inside us. It's there within us. We don't need anyone to tell us if something is unjust or just. We can feel it, we can see it, especially when it's so horrendous. And so it is, and in essence, injustice is an act against God. It's related to your faith in God. There's a verse in Surah 6, verse 33, where God says that to the Prophet ﷺ. He says to him, "O Muhammad, we know indeed that the things they say grieve you, though in truth it is not you whom they reject, but it is the signs of Allah that these wrongdoers reject." So this is God comforting the Prophet, saying, I know that you're sad, but don't get too upset. It's not you that they have a problem with, it's me. So don't worry about it. Don't take it personally. And there are verses in the Al-Imran that have similar tones. So for example, Ayah 139, do not falter or grieve, for you will have the upper hand if you are true believers. Again, God trying to shift your focus from this world to the next world and saying it doesn't matter what victory looks like on this earth. It doesn't matter how defeated you seem. As long as you keep your faith, you have the upper hand. As long as you keep your faith, you are victorious, no matter what defeat looks like while you're on earth. And also, verses in the Quran about the martyrs, that we shouldn't grieve for them because they're with their Lord rejoicing. Again, God asking you to shift your focus from this world to the next. If you're suffering because they've been killed, don't worry about it. They're in a better place. They're much happier than you are. Again, God's shifting your focus, trying to keep your focus on what matters, which is the hereafter, trying to keep your focus on Him. Don't you worry about what's going on here. You keep your faith and everything will be fine. And then there's lots of verses on activism in Al Imran. For example, Verse 104, let there be a group of you who call others to goodness, encourage what is good and forbid what is evil. It is they who will be successful. And then there's verse 110, you are the best community ever raised for humanity. You encourage good, forbid evil, and believe in Allah. And then the most potent and relevant verses to this time is verse 172 to 173. As for those who respond to the call of Allah and His Messenger after their injury, those of them who do good and were mindful of Allah will have great reward. Those who are warned, your enemies have mobilized their forces against you, so fear them. The warning only made them grow stronger in faith, and they replied, Allah alone is sufficient as an aid for us, and He is the best of protectors. And I think it's so potent to be reminded of these verses at this time, because goodness and doing good and being active and any form of activism can feel so pointless. What's the point? Because the powers you're against are so strong and so vast, and they have so much power, and you have such little power. And you can think, what's the point? Why should I? Nothing's going to change. I'm sure many of us have thought along those lines. I certainly have. And these verses just reinforce the fact that you've got to remain active, you've got to enjoy good, forbid evil, for as long as you are alive. And these things are honourable, and it doesn't matter who you're up against and how much power they have. We've got to fight, even if we know we're going to lose this fight. Because as God says, as long as we keep our faith, it doesn't matter what defeat looks like on earth. We are victorious as long as we keep the faith. And keeping faith means enjoining good for humanity and standing up for humanity against overwhelming powers of injustice and darkness. Seek help in patience and prayer. Ask Allah to guide you. Keep your focus on the bigger picture. We often think if we don't see justice in our lifetime, then no justice has been done. That's not how it goes. The world was here way before you were, and it will be here way after you are. And just because you don't see justice in your lifetime or the fruits of your labour and good actions in your lifetime, it doesn't mean that they will never come to fruition. It doesn't mean that they meant nothing. It's important that you place your brick in this wall for justice when you leave this earth. And that wall, another person will place their brick on top, another person will place their brick. And at first it will start off as nothing and it will do nothing, but it will get bigger. Just because you're not here to witness it doesn't mean it's insignificant. Our actions carry on until the end of time. Our goodness carries on as a witness to us long after we die. The way we inspire people to do good, sometimes our actions can change people's lives. Sometimes you may inspire someone through one word or one action, and you change them, and they become this different person, and then they have children, and they raise their children based on something you said or did. And those children will go on to teach their children and their children, their children. So never belittle a good action, and don't do it for victory. Do it for God. Remember, I have written an article about this. You can find it on the website. I've gone into a bit more detail on there, and there's a few more verses on there as well that you might like to check out. Do pray for the people of Gaza. Do pray for the downtrodden everywhere on this earth. And pray for yourselves. May God give you strength, peace, and faith, and the courage to have faith. And also pray for me. On that note, brothers and sisters, do take care.